Thank you. Okay. If you can't see the text up there, there's a whole empty row here, okay? Look, I know my shirt is offensive, but please feel free to come closer if you can't necessarily read all of the examples. Okay. What I'd like to start with is, when I've seen cloud talks before, they have been, for lack of a better word, kind of fluffy. You're allowed to groan there or throw things. And also, people have said complimentary things about my presentations in the past, so I thought the best first step to do here would be just to get rid of it. And what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to apologize for this, we are going to spend this entire session on the command line. So if just looking at code constantly is not your thing, you may have come to the wrong event. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Of course, without the presentation, then I can't tell you really who I am. Luckily, back in the old days, before we had Twitter and Facebook and PowerPoint and so on, there was a way of getting to know each other. And that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to invite you to finger me. And what that enables you to do is find out some information about me. So let's see what fingering results in. And just in case you were worried about the lack of visuals, I do have ASCII art throughout the presentation as well. Okay, so this is me, Rowan Merewood. I'm a software engineer and technical team lead at the Invika group. So we've got Sensio Labs UK, Invika, and Session Digital. You can find me on these various social networks, Rowan M on Twitter, Rowan N on GitHub, Rowan M on Identica, from when we all decided that Twitter was evil and we were going to migrate away from it. And you can also find me on Google+. Sorry, guys, I didn't I saw profiles.google.com in Ian's presentation, so I will put something more sensible in there next time. You can also take a look at my blog on merewood.org, which I update on a semi-regular basis. Now, if at the end of this presentation you like what you've seen and you think maybe you could do a better job than me, or maybe you would like to work with me, then we are also hiring, and we've got offices here in London, Manchester, Liverpool, and Sheffield as well, where I'm based. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a sample project. This is going to be our little toy project to see what it is we're going to do with the Amazon platform and the various tools that are available to us. So the first thing I need is a name here. And I conveniently thought, well, why not do the sample app at the same time as I do my kind of long-term developer investment plan? Because I'm a developer, obviously my kind of long-term pension strategy is to make an app that then gets bought by Facebook or Google for a ridiculously inflated amount of money. So I thought, ASCIIgram. Right, we'll learn what this is going to do over the course of the next 45 minutes. Okay, so let's jump into the directory. And as I imagine you're going to see a lot of during this during this conference, we're going to start off by just firing up a composer.json. So before we dive into the AWS stuff, we just need a simple Hello World app up and running. So that's what we're going to put together. I'm going to use Silex for this. So don't worry if you don't know Silex. This is not the point of the talk. This is just to illustrate the examples. Right, so we're just going to ask for Silex, and we're going to go and install that. Grab all the dependencies, and install those packages as well. You can see it pulls in a lot of the Symfony components into here. And now, the first thing we need is we do actually need an application to pull stuff from. Now, when I'm testing out a cloud platform, I often like to make sure that I start with the simplest thing possible. And the simplest thing possible is to make sure that you're serving up static files. So you're definitely just getting the code that you're getting. So inside of here, we're going to use the humans.txt one for this, simply because it lets me actually show the people who have helped contribute to this. So I did this app a while ago, and I've just had people kind of correcting all the horrible mistakes I made. And also some of the guys from the AWS team made some contributions to bring it up to the latest version. So hopefully the stuff I'm showing you is officially approved Amazon kind of things here. Okay, so we've got a text file. So if we can serve a text file, we know we've at least passed stage 1. So the next thing I do is normally just throw an info.php in there as well. This is quite useful on platforms that you don't have access to, so that you can find out, what modules are being loaded, what kind of settings are in there, and also verify that PHP is actually running and being processed. Now the interesting bit, let's put our index file in here. So we're just going to do a very simple hello world application. That's all it does, spits out a string. No HTML, no decoration, anything like that. Okay, and just a standard HT access in there so that we can actually redirect things to the controller when we get around to having the full app. And let's just take a little recap of what we've created in there. Another thing I'm going to say as well, I am deliberately going to blast through this as quickly as possible. You should not be remembering what I'm doing here. My aim here is to put these ideas in your head so that you remember them. And when you come to do anything AWS related, then you'll have that little trigger that you did see a tool and you know what kind of thing you're looking for. Also, if you're interested in this, it is all up on GitHub, and I am around for the rest of the conference. So if you feel like, say, approaching me at the bar, bringing me a drink, getting me to talk about code, then I'm totally cool with that. In fact, that's why I'm here. I'm here for you guys. Okay, so a quick recap of what we've got in there then. We've got our composer.json, we've got all the stuff that it's pulled in, and we've got this incredibly simple application that we've dropped in the root. So first of all, we're using 5.4, so let's verify that's actually doing what we expect locally. So we're going to fire up the web server there, and that's running. And now we're just going to curl a quick request against that. You guys ready? This does get exciting. Oh, look at that. Oh, actually, can everyone read that? No. Yes? You guys asleep after lunch? Okay. So we've got hello world down here. I need more life, okay? Otherwise, this is just not going to work. Okay, so we're happy. We've got an application that is actually serving up something. So now, we're going to get that all committed in the Git repo. So we just ignore the vendor directory, because that's all the stuff that we pulled in from our third-party libraries. And we just want to fire up our repo, add the stuff that we've got in there. It's our basic hello world app. Right, we're now ready to push this to the cloud. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the magic part first. So this is the whole kind of beautiful dream of you literally just push your code up to the cloud and it magically runs in a scalable environment. So this bit is not going to make too much sense. This is just going through the motions to see what happens, and then we're going to dive into the detail of all the tools and the various services available to you afterwards. So first thing we're going to do is you can do all of this through the Amazon Web API, but obviously to do it in this format, I'd have to use links, which isn't going to work that well for all of this. So we're going to do it on the command line. The benefit of this as well is that we can actually script all of these things in the long term. So grab the tools. If your wife happens to be playing World of Warcraft at the time, this can take a little while, especially if Windows is doing something weird to your network. We're going to unzip that, and you can see that what we've got inside of here is a number of different, so the services themselves are in Python, and you can see that we've got executables for all the various platforms in there, so it'll work on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Okay, first thing we need to do then is make sure that we've got those tools on our path. So we've got two tool sets in here. We've got /EB, which is the kind of much more integrated one that we're going to look at first, and then we'll go into the nuts and bolts of what's going on behind that. We've got EB in there, so all our commands are going to go through this EB shortcut. The tools are actually really nicely documented in line. So once you've got the tool set down and you're running it, I actually found there was very little need to go back to the Amazon website because most of the documentation is just there in the tools themselves, which is very cool. So just to verify that's actually doing what we expect. Cool. We've got a command line interface to AWS Elastic Beanstalk. As just a quick summary of what Elastic Beanstalk is, this is kind of Amazon's way of wrapping up a bunch of services. So EC2 and S3 are the kind of standard ones people know about, the scalable computing, the scalable storage. This basically gives you a load balancer with a group of EC2 instances behind it, optionally an RDS database that you can fire up, some security settings, and it gives you a LAMP stack as well. So it enables you to get running very quickly and just push your code up and not really worry about what's going on. Okay, the next thing we need is a user that can access this. So I've created a user on my Amazon account. And you can see that I've been given some credentials for it, obviously secret ones that you're not going to see, but I get an access key and I get a secret access key as well. And these are just what I use to make sure that the clients can communicate with the AWS platform. And also, this just goes in a particular format here, which is what the tool is going to pick up. So I'll just make those secure by chmodding them, and I'm going to export it into this environment variable, which is where the tool is expecting to find it. You can also supply this on a per command basis if, say, you need to use different credentials for different projects. Okay, we've got this up and running. Let's jump back into our application. Do you like the animation there? Okay. First thing we do is we need to prep our repository so that we can push this stuff up into the cloud. So there's a script provided with that. The tools are removing really quickly, which is very cool. The problem I found, though, is it does sometimes result in things like this, which is not brilliant, especially if it's, say, 3 in the morning and you had to do this talk very soon afterwards. So at that point, we just need to go and fix the setup script there. So inside of here, just in case this is still an issue, and in fact, if anyone feels like pushing me to push some kind of fix back to these guys later on this evening, that would be very cool. So we're just going to correct a little issue that they had there and just hard code it. But what this is doing is it's preparing our Git repository to interact with the Elastic Beanstalk platform. So we run it again, and no output means something good has happened. And if we take a look, we can now have access to the eb-init command. What this is going to do is it's going to bring up our Elastic Beanstalk environment for us after asking us a few questions. So we just run through here, and you can see it's going to start asking us a bunch of things. So our key, which we've already got, our secret key. Now we get into the interesting stuff. First of all, you get to choose which service region your AWS instance goes into. When people are talking about the AWS outages recently, most of the time what they mean is they do not mean that an entire region went down. So they're divided up into geographical regions where you can host your service, and then inside of those regions, you have multiple availability zones available to you so that you can fail over services between those availability zones. So we're going to pick US East because it's cheap. It's certainly a lot cheaper than trying to host in Tokyo. Then we need to pick a name for our application. Luckily, ASCIIgram is the one that is the name of the directory, so that's good. Now, we create an environment as well. A brief explanation, but we'll go into more detail. Your application has environments within it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to fire up just the default name, ASCIIgram env, but the idea here is that you would probably have a dev, a staging, and a production environment as well. Now, this is the cool bit. These are the solution stacks available to you. When you run this, this will actually take a minute to come back because it is going off and querying the available solution stacks from Amazon at the time. So when they started, it was literally just a Tomcat container. You can see that they are adding way more services as they go on. You can even experiment with running things under 2 different versions of Windows Server if you like. We're of course interested in the PHP version, so we're going to pick number 2, the 64-bit one. We can optionally hook up an RDS database to it as well. What that means is it'll spin up a database for us, and it will make the credentials available in our environment so that we can access them from our application. We don't need that for our Hello World application at the moment because obviously we're not talking to a database. Okay. Let's take a look at what that's created for us. So that will have spit out its config file. And again, this is all nicely scripted, and it follows the very Unixy kind of philosophy of it will just spit out a plain text file that you can edit yourself afterwards if you need to. So inside of here, you can just see that we've got a plain old config file that's got all the values that we chose inside of it. Okay, now the cool stuff. One of the reasons I didn't do this live is despite being, well, not despite, whilst I am also incredibly disaster prone when it comes to these kind of things, this also does take a little while. Spinning up your environment for the first time launches a lot of different resources. So I've just encapsulated it together in a nice little form for you here. So you see we fire up the application, then we fire up the environment inside of it, and then inside of here, what this is doing is it starts creating the resources for you. Now, behind the scenes again, there's a tool called CloudFormation here, which lets you specify resources that go into your stack. So a lot of stuff that you do with Elastic Beanstalk, you can take it on and customize for larger, more complicated applications as well. So you can see we're firing up a load balancer, security group, the auto-scaling configuration around that as well. And then a bit later on, we create a number of alarms that go out through the simple notification service. And eventually, we get successfully launched environment. And it spits out the URL that is available for us at the end. So this seems quite cool. We should be able to curl that now and see our hello world. You ready? You guys look ready. Okay. Oh, right, that is not really what we were expecting. So what actually happens here is when you bring up the environment for the first time, you haven't deployed anything to it. So what you get is the default version deployed there, which is just a kind of helpful intro application that points you off to different AWS resources. So what we need to do is just take a look at what's been created for us now that we've initialized an environment. You can see that we've got settings for that particular environment there. So before we go and push some code, let's take a look at what we've got running inside of that. Basically, you can see there are a bunch of different things that we're able to configure on our container that's wrapping our application. So the first thing we need to do is we need to change the document root. By default, that's just pointing at the root of your version that you've uploaded. Web is ours, so we're just going to change that. We're also just going to stick display errors on while we're tinkering with it. And now one of the other things we're going to do is you've got the auto-scaling parameters down here where you can set the max and minimum instances. For the purposes of testing, I'm just going to set my maximum instances to 1 as well so that I just have one server to deal with. If there are errors going on when you're developing, it's obviously a lot easier to just have one server that you can go check rather than an arbitrary number. On top of that as well, what the load balancer will do is most of the time, if it detects that a server is unhealthy, then it will remove it from the group and it will spin up a new one for you. Again, when you're debugging, that can be fairly unhelpful if you're trying to go find out about the error log, and then Amazon helpfully removes the instance for you. So let's make that false. Okay. You can see as well that it's created some stuff inside of that when it ran the setup script. So we're just going to ignore that because we don't want the AWS stuff inside of our repo. We'll get rid of that. Commit that. It's our initial Elastic Beanstalk integration. And now we issue EB update. And what this does is it updates the environment with those settings that we've changed. So we say yes to that. And you can see that what this does is this takes a little bit of time as well because it's bringing down the servers and bringing them back up with the new configuration. It's not as long as the initial setup because you've got a lot of the base resources there, but it still does take a little bit of time. So we'll go through that, and you can see that we've got a health update that's come through to us there as well. So now, the reason that's happened is because we've changed our document root to be web, but we haven't pushed any code there yet. So the health check is automatically coming back saying, oh, hey, I requested /web, and I'm just getting 404s or 500s or whatever. All that AWS integration goes into the Git, goes into your Git repository and is then available via Git subcommands. So we can issue Git AWS push. What that's going to do is take everything we've got in our repo, push it up to the cloud somewhere, and then deploy it onto our stack. So inside of here, you can see that we've basically just pushed that up to this location. Okay, now we can check the status. It's green because our version's been deployed. And third time lucky, some excitement here, guys. Yes! Woo! Okay, good, go home. Right. Right, so we've got an application deployed, it's running, that will arbitrarily scale for us as well based on the default scaling parameters that are in there. But that's not very interesting because there's too much magic going on. And there are a number of things that might cause you problems. That literally has just pushed your code. It does do some stuff in the background now, so it has been getting more advanced. So you notice that I Git ignored all of the stuff in my vendor directory, so none of my dependencies were actually pushed up with my version. But when it gets deployed, it does actually do some magic with Composer to pull in those dependencies for you as well. However, that's just lucky. If you were, say, not using Git as your version control system, or you had some other scripting related things that you needed to do before you just pushed code up, then obviously you're going to have to find a way to work around this. So let's delete the application that we've got up there. And now we're going to deal with the command line tools themselves. These give us access to all the inner workings of the AWS stuff. The first thing we do is we fire up the API command, and we're going to test it with the Elastic Beanstalk. And all the commands are in this format. They're quite verbose, but it does mean that you can easily kind of sit there tapping tab until the right option that you want pops up. So let's do that. And we can see that we are contacting the service, and we're getting that list back. So we're in a good place. We know our commands are working. OK. So now, this is where we start finding out what is actually going on behind the scenes. So with some amazing diagramming skills, this is what we are creating when we talk about Elastic Beanstalk. So your application is this big container around here, and that's literally all your application is. It's pretty much a container with a name. Inside of your container, you have multiple environments. So this is what I was talking about with a development environment, a staging environment, production environment, whatever number you need to create. Then, your versions that you push are archives that are stored in an S3 bucket in your account. And when you deploy that, you are basically deploying one of those archives into the environment that you specify. So this enables you to do things like push stuff to your development environment, get it fixing, verify it's working, then deploy it to the staging environment, then to production. You can also do some nifty things with Amazon's Route 53, which is their DNS service, where you've got some options for automatically switching over to a new environment. So deploying to the environment does have a little downtime associated with it as it pulls down the archive, extracts it, and restarts the service. You can just deploy to a fresh environment and then switch over to serving that one and bring the old one down. That's also a nicer way of, if you realize that your new environment is not working at all, you still have the old one there that you can immediately switch back to as a failover. Okay. So the first thing we need to do then is create our application. So like I was saying, you can ask for help on all of these commands and get a helpful list of what's going on in there. So as you can see, this is literally all it is. It's a name and a description. So we're going to create our container and create ASCII-RAM. And we get a response back like this. It spits everything out in that kind of pipe separated format. So it's fairly readable on the command line, but with some of the larger ones, you need a pretty widescreen monitor to actually get a useful visual out of it. Okay, now we want to create the application version, the code that we're going to deploy into our eventual environment. So we just look at that as well. You can see we're starting to get a bit more information inside of here. Also, I'm showing you the verbose way of doing this to take you through each of the components. You can see here that you've got the option to auto-create the application along with the version as well. So there are much quicker ways of doing the things that I'm showing you here. So let's create an application version. It's just our vdev001, which is our initial empty version. And you can see that we haven't passed it anything. So it's basically pulled down that sample application that we saw the first time we ran our Elastic Beanstalk environment. Okay. Now we create the environment that is going to basically glue that version to our container. So inside of here, now you can see that we're starting to get a lot more options available to us. So let's fire up an environment again. This is our development environment, and we're passing in the stack that we're interested in running, which is that 64-bit version of PHP again. And we get back the answer that our environment has come up, and we start to see some interesting things in here, like the health status. So when the environment is coming up, it's gray. You've got red for obviously when it's unhealthy, green when it's happy, and yellow for when it's somewhere in between. Okay. Because that hasn't necessarily given us a lot of information, one of the things that you can do is you can pass the -j option to almost all of the tools, and that will give you JSON output, which when you're scripting this stuff is incredibly helpful. So I'm just piping it into Python to get some formatting. So you can see I describe my environment, and I get it in a much nicer structure back to me. So let's take a look for the status there. So what I find is because this does take a while, I kind of sit there just running through this one, launching, ready. Okay, so we're good. And let's check the health as well. The health is green. Everybody's happy. Okay, now that's because we are at the same stage as we were before. It's our sample application that is just up and running, serving that static page. So what we need to do here is take a look at the configuration settings that are available to us. So I describe that, and you can see that basically I get a shitload of stuff there. Same thing that I was interested in before. I need to change the document root. So I'm just going to copy that, and I drop that into a configuration file here. So I just create a little array with the setting that I was interested in, and I've updated that to web. And then what the tool allows you to do is you can do the update environment, and you can basically just pass back that file of the configuration changes that you want to make. So again, this is pretty cool. You can set up the default environment, and then you can have all your custom configuration just saved there that you can then very rapidly push up to the environment to change those settings. So we do that, and we're relaunching the environment to get it updated. And you can see that our document root setting is now changed to web. Okay. Now we need to actually push some code up there to see what's going on. So let's see how we are doing for time. Oh, cool, okay. We've got a bucket that's been created when we created our application. I'm just using this S3 command one, which is one that was just available on the command line. There are a number of S3 clients out there that you can use, lots of visual ones if you prefer a more visual interface. There's a Perl-based one as well. So let's jump in here, and what we need to do is we need to create the archive that we're going to send up. So that is what our get AWS push was doing for us in the background. It was pushing off to a remote Git repo, then that was being zipped up and pushed onto S3. We're going to zip it up ourselves and then push it up to S3. So one of the things I'm doing here as well is I'm just stripping out all of the stuff that I don't want to push up there. Since the first time I did this, I realized that Symfony has a lot of unit tests associated with it and a lot of documentation in there as well. So I was trying to upload a kind of 30 meg archive over my home connection, and that just wasn't working. Okay, so we've created our application, our version, and you can see that all I did was just give it a name with a timestamp in there as well. So there we are, it's a 2013 version. So now we're going to put this up into the bucket that Elastic Beanstalk created for us. You see that going up. And now that we've got the version there, the final step is to just tell it, okay, create a version. And we're saying, there we go, version from zip file. We just give it a helpful label for us, and then we tell it, and that's where the version can be found, in that bucket with that name. So version's created, and now we tell the environment, right, deploy this version into my environment. Will it? Won't it? Who knows? Okay. Yes, hello world. Right. Just to recap then, obviously you wouldn't go through all of those commands each time, that would be stupid. So let's script it up. So you can see here, create a version with a useful name, whatever name is helpful for you, zip up the code you want into that file, put that version onto S3, create the application version so that you've basically got a bookmark to that file, and then deploy that version into your requested environment. Okay. That is the first half of the talk. We've covered how we can deploy stuff up into the environment. So now let's do something slightly more interesting with ASCIIgram rather than just making it output some text. First thing we need to do then is grab some other tools that we want to use. So I'm just going to throw in a bunch here. I'm just grabbing a bunch of the Symfony components so that I can actually do something with this application. But more interesting, you see I'm grabbing the Amazon Web Services SDK. So this is going to give us access to all the services available on the platform. Okay, so if we update this, then this takes a substantially longer time because we have a whole bunch more stuff to pull in. And if we take a look at what's been created, you can now see in the vendor directory, we've got Amazon Web Services there for us. And if we take a look at what's inside, you can see that you basically get a class for each of the services available to you. I'm showing you a slightly earlier version. There is a newer version of the AWS SDK that uses the Guzzle HTTP client to communicate with these services. However, it's not as fully featured yet. They are adding services very quickly, but it's not all of them at this point. So you may find yourself preferring the older one if you need specific service access. Okay, so what I'm going to do is stick some stuff into my Silex application. This is the configuration for the AWS SDK, is you basically pass in the key and your secret here, and it can do a bunch of default caching into APC for you, so it is actually quite performant. And then let's have a look at what we've got in there. So I'm not going to take you through all of the application. I'm just going to take you through the relevant bits that connect into the AWS service. So you can see that I'm going to make use of Dynamo DB, I'm going to make use of the S3 service, and I'm going to make use of the simple notification service. Right, so let's take a look at what our application is going to do then. Don't worry about this. This is just the standard form stuff inside of Symfony. The bit that we're interested in here is we are going to create a form and then upload an image. So down here, I've created an image uploader class, which is going to talk to S3 to upload my image. So inside of, before we go into the code, a little break. I will, just in case you get disappointed, this is one of 2 visual slides in this entire talk. So if that kind of graphical thing offends you, then look away now. So this is what our application looks like. I've used Twitter Bootstrap because otherwise my interfaces look like a child made them. So let's pick an image. I was trying to use the PHP UK logo, but it doesn't render particularly well. So I took an image earlier this morning. That is actually an effect. That's not just a result of me using Linux. So let's upload that and write a clever message to go with it. Press the button, and things are going off to the cloud, and mysterious things are happening. Now, before I give you the payoff of what we're actually going to do with that image, let's see what's happening in the background. So our image uploader class that has accepted that is going to do 2 things. It's going to store the image on S3 for us, and then it's going to fire out a notification saying it's been uploaded. So the idea here is that I want to do some very complex processing with my image that is going to be quite expensive, so I want to offload that rather than doing it inside of the request. So first of all, let's take a look at S3. S3 is pretty simple to understand. I've just written some wrappers around the bits that I want. So inside of here, all I'm going to do is persist my image upload, and then I'm going to send the notification. So inside of the S3 service, you can see that what I'm doing is I'm just passing in the configuration. Then inside of here, I'm just firing up the new Amazon S3. Again, this is the old SDK, so it's all globally namespaced. The new one is, has a lot more 5.4 integration, so is properly packaged up for you. And then I'm going to persist my image upload. So inside of here, I'm just grabbing the service. Sorry. Yeah, let's go back to here. Right. We can do all of the setup through the SDK. Now, what I'm also going to show you is that this application kind of bootstraps itself. So if the resources don't exist, it goes off and creates them. Obviously, this is the kind of thing that you would do in an installation script beforehand rather than letting it run in your request. So all I'm doing is I fire up my S3 service, check if the bucket exists. If it doesn't, then I'm going to create it. I can pass in a number of things here, so I can actually serve stuff directly from the bucket. I can make the ACL public, and people can just hit those images directly, or I can make it private if I want to keep that stuff away from the public eye. Once I get a response back that says my bucket's there, then we basically just, we create it. If it doesn't, we're going to just loop around and check until it's ready. Obviously, a loop with a sleep 1 is not the kind of thing that you would want to put in a performant web application. Okay, our image is up, so now let's send a notification out so that we know that the image is there. So the SNS service basically fires off notifications to subscribers of your choice. Your subscriber can be an SMS message, it can be an email message, your notification can come in this form, and then you have various subscribers to it. The one we're going to use is the straight HTTP request. So we're just going to get a little packet of JSON come to us on the other end that tells us something has happened. So inside of here, you can see that we're taking our image upload, which is just the data from our form, and we're going to get the SNS service, which inside of here, you can see that all of the topics that we have an ARN, and then we're creating a subscriber here. So because our subscriber is HTTP, we need to give it an endpoint. If your subscriber was email, you'd be supplying an email address. If it was SMS, you'd be supplying a mobile number. So this is where our application is currently hosted, and we're going to pass it to process to get the information going there. See how we're doing? Yeah, okay. Right. Let's take a look at what's happening. So when that notice gets fired off and hits our endpoint, this is our endpoint here. So we're expecting post requests to process, And SNS, as it says there, posts us JSON in the request body. So we're just going to read that straight out and JSON decode it. And then we're going to use that, we're going to handle that message inside of our image transformer, which does some exciting things. Okay, the image transformer in here needs to handle two responsibilities. Now, one thing the simple notification service doesn't let you do is just fire out notifications all over the place to anyone who just happens to be a subscriber for them. So, for example, you could conceivably use this to send spam text messages. Luckily, what you need to do is you need to respond to a subscription request to actually make sure that those messages go through. So that's what we're doing here. If the message type is a subscription confirmation, then we fire up the SMS service and we just need to send a confirmation message back to SNS. And that means that we'll start getting the proper notifications. Again, this is something you would set up as part of the entire infrastructure rather than inside of the request. So let's just take a look at what it's doing there. You can see it's pretty simple. All we do is send confirm subscription. We need to send back the message, the token that we were given, so that we know that the confirmation is actually coming as a result of the request that we were given. Right. Now, if that is a notification, then the thing that I'm allowed to send in the message is basically text of my choice. You get a very short amount that you're allowed to send because obviously it can go over text message as well. So all I'm sending there in the subject is the ID of the image that I uploaded to S3, so I know what I'm going off to try and retain, to try and process afterwards. So I'm doing some interesting things with this. I've got the image URL in my message. And what we're going to do is we're going to off and we're going to get that out of our bucket. So the S3 service does allow you to do some quite cool things. You can either get the object URL or you can download the object directly, depending on what's more useful for you at the time. So we get that. And then we're going to swap back. I'm going to skip over the magic that's going on in here. I'll just show you the end result of it. If you're interested in exactly how that's happening, it's ugly, but you can come find me in the bar afterwards. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the Dynamo DB service to store this index of our images. I'll say up front that this is the NoSQL service that they had. I kind of threw this in because I thought a NoSQL example would be cool. In retrospect, this was the wrong choice to use for this, and I will show you why. Okay, the Dynamo DB service we fire up, and we just want to persist something to our database. So inside of here, we're going to go db put item, and as you can see, this bit is fairly simple. The first thing we need to do is make sure that our table exists. This is something that you definitely do in advance because setting up a Dynamo DB table can take a couple minutes. So inside of here, you can see we pick a table name and we define some things about the table. Again, this is standard NoSQL stuff, so I won't go into the detail of this, just suffice to say that this service does exist. One thing to watch out for, unlike a lot of the other services where you pay for what you use, with the Dynamo DB service, you pay for the capacity that you are requesting to be provisioned. So the first time I tried this, I put some slightly larger numbers than I expected in there, and it was when the $100 AWS charge came through over the course of the next week that I realized that, oh right, that is a slightly expensive way just to do development testing. So play with this, keep it as low as you possibly can when you need to do the development. Okay, and what we're going to do there is we're just going to create the table, and we can issue the describe table command, so we just loop around again to see that our table has actually come up and running. Okay. Then we can put our item in there, and you can see that all I'm doing is I'm firing off some fairly simple fields. So I've got the upload date, I've got the image ID, I've got the message, and I've got the gramified output that I created there. DynamoDB is actually quite limited on the amount on the size of the individual items that you can put into it. So again, for this one, what I ended up doing is using DynamoDB much more as just an index of those uploaded images that I could point to things on S3 rather than storing the data in the database itself. Okay. So now we get to the final exciting step where we're actually going to pull stuff back out of the database and take a look at it. So what we've got here is our image lister, which is going to go off and fetch the latest uploads from our database. So let's take a look at what's going on inside of there. we need two things. We need our Dynamo DB service to get the latest uploads, and then we need our S3 service to go and get the actual images that have been created. So inside of here, we're firing off a query to the Dynamo DB service. Now, who's familiar with NoSQL services? Yeah, I knew Derek would be. Okay. What this means is it's not so much a query in a kind of standard SQL sense. You're more setting out a bunch of conditions that are being returned back to you. So inside of here, you can see we're specifying a table name, the attributes that we want to get, the limit that we want. The scan index forward conveniently means that we actually want to get those in reverse order, so we get the most recent images first. And then you can see that we're doing a comparison here. So we're doing a condition less than or equal to against the, where is it? Right, we're sending in the time there so that we're getting stuff and comparing it to the current time. Okay, we're nearly there, guys. We're going to see what happened to the image that we uploaded. Excited? Is that excited for developers? I think that's probably excited for developers, right. Okay, let's take a look at what's going on then. Wow, I was excited by this. Admittedly, it was very late and I'd had a lot of coffee, so my excitement threshold was pretty high, pretty low. Okay, so that, I hope, has given you an overview of the services available to you on AWS, how you can put those things together, how you can easily pull those services into your application, and how you can set yourself up for a lifetime of fame and fortune later on when your company gets floated and bought. So it just remains for me to say thanks very much for your time. Please, please, please go to Joined In and give me ratings there. If there are things you didn't like, then tell me about it. I can cry into my drink later on, don't worry. I only have pretend feelings anyway. We don't really have a lot of time left, so I would say questions, but I would just say thank you guys, and please find me later on if there's anything you want to discuss. I'm more than happy to go into the code in a lot of detail. Thank you.